Thank you. Thank you. It's amazing to be here. It's a wonderful time to be alive once again for another edition of the Africa Voiceover Day. Thank you so much, Jamaica, for the introduction. I appreciate it. Sometimes I just try to run away from those things. Just, just say, once you say Seun Shobo, I'm good to go. Um, right. The keynote address I will be taking, I've titled it The Past, the Present, and the Future. But actually, the topic given to me was the evolution of voiceover in Africa. I don't know if there's a way I could share my slides so that everybody can see. But I'm going to be reading from the slides. Uh, is it possible for me to share, or should I just go on? Okay, all right, all right. So please just stay with me. Stay with me. All right. Now, I don't know if anybody listened or heard that, there was some silence in the room. It was a deafening silence just for a few seconds, right? The silence was very, and it was intentional. Um, why was it intentional? That silence was how silent African voices, right, were on the global stage, right? We were very silent on the global stage. We weren't heard, right? But today, we stand at the threshold of a new era. Today, our voices, your voices, resonate across continents, um, streaming services, commercials, animations, and audiobooks. That journey from silence to sonic dominance is what brings us together this evening. Let's take a moment to examine our journey. Now, if you followed the history of voices or voice artistry or voiceover artistry, in the beginning, the ancient times, there were town criers, griots, our continent's first ever voice talents. For centuries, these oral communicators, historians, praise singers, and storytellers carried our narratives through sound alone. They were the original voiceover artists, though they never needed microphones. This is an example of one. That's a Congolese native town crier. I also remember some of the stories we've read in some novels in the past, especially in Nigeria. We had a lot of those town criers who would always announce what the king was saying, right? When I started in this industry over 2 decades ago, the landscape had been tilled and seeds had been sown by our predecessors, but our land was still barren, right? Let me take you back to about 2001, which I can remember very clearly. There were various types of recording studios. There were the upscale ones, which had the big mixers and, padded areas, but there were also the mushroom ones with little spaces where we also did some recordings that had egg cartons, right? That were used for soundproofing, right? Some people will not believe that. Some people just say, "What? For real?" Yes, those things were used as well. Professional microphones were super expensive. A couple were purchased second hand from radio stations or the Western world. There were no voice acting schools in Africa. There were no agents. There were no conferences. There was no Africa Voiceover Day. No specific rate cards. Associations. There were some existing associations, but no strong communities. When clients needed African voices, they would often hire non-Africans to imitate our accents, creating caricatures rather than authentic representation. Our stories were told through foreign perspectives. Our languages got messed up for international consumption. Now, where are we going? We are reclaiming our narrative. I remember a story of a colleague recording an ad for a major brand that had strong affiliations, so strong foreign affiliations. When he delivered it and his natural Nigerian inflections and accent, the producer asked him, sound more African. He's like, more African than an actual African, he asked. He replied, like in the movies, like in the movies. apart from this, I've also heard such statements series of times. Such situations have made me deeply understand that our challenge isn't about just building an industry, it was about reclaiming our narrative power. Now, what is the present looking like? We've talked about the past, reclaiming our narrative, and the past. And the present. Now we are at the present. Now, today, the African voiceover industry stands transformed. If you don't believe me, consider these milestones. Number one, there's a growth. We have growth in talent, our talent base. There's growth in our talent base. From a handful of professional voice actors across the continent, we now have thousands, I mean, literal thousands of trained professionals, right? World-class facilities. From makeshift studios, we built world-class recording facilities and home studios all across Lagos, Abuja, Nairobi, Kenya, Johannesburg, Cairo, and beyond. Voice makers, from being voice takers, we become voice makers with our unique African storytelling techniques, influencing global continent. Sorry, influencing global content, right? Our momentum is undeniable. The streaming revolution opened doors that were previously closed to us. Global audiences became hungry for authentic representation. The pandemic, despite its devastation, accelerated remote work capabilities, connecting African voices to international opportunities without geographic limitations. More on our present. Now, these are some numbers that I came across. Now, there's a 300% growth rate. African talent bookings have grown by 300% in the last 5 years. That's a lot. That's a lot, right? And we have come, it shows you that we've come a long way, right? Um, Nigerians now feature in animations watched by children across 5 continents. South Africans' voices are narrating documentaries for major international networks. Kenyan voices are becoming the hallmark voices for developmental or development projects. Um, while Egyptian and Moroccan voices are taking over aviation announcements, international departures or arrivals, looking at the likes of Emirates, Turkish Airlines, and the rest of that, you find that a lot of these voices are Egyptian voices, Moroccan voices. Now, our languages are distinct, right? We have over 2,000 languages in Africa. Isn't that amazing? Amazing, amazing fact, right? But perhaps the most profound change isn't in technology or economics, it is perception. We no longer mimic Western delivery styles to be accepted. Instead, our unique cadences, our multilingual capabilities, our cultural nuances have become our greatest assets. The world isn't asking us to sound less African anymore. They're asking us to sound more authentically ourselves. Now, the future. What does Africa's voice look like in global storytelling? Where do we go from here? The horizon before us presents endless possibilities. AI and technology, artificial intelligence, for example, represents both a challenge and an opportunity. Voice cloning technology threatens to dilute the market for human performances, yet, our linguistic diversity with over 2,000 distinct languages makes African voices invaluable for training these systems ethically and accurately. The metaverse and extended reality domains will require voices for billions of digital characters and experiences. Who better to provide that diversity than the continent with the world's richest vocal heritage? Audiobook markets. Audiobook narration, currently dominated by American and British voices, represents a vast untapped market. And as African literature continues to gain global recognition, African voices must be the one telling African stories. It has already started, but it must now be the standard. Not trying to uh, think about it, but it must be now be the. Now, beyond the commercial opportunity, um, the vision I envision personally, um, is one of cultural perception. African voiceover talent and actors shaping how the world perceives our countries and cultures. right? Because one of these things that you find out is when you come to the Western world, not it's not the fact that they don't have systems. They have systems that work. But you will find out that a lot of things, especially from the creative industry, voiceover talent, voice actors, screen actors, they are the ones that shape the perceptions of their country and the cultures, which makes it now mainstream cultures, right? So what we need to do is to actually, from our own side of the divide, right, start to do that, start shaping perception through with our voices, using our culture, and definitely talking about our countries, positive perceptions about who we are as Africans, right? Language preservation, our indigenous languages preserved and celebrated through voice performance. Educational impact, educational content in local dialects, reaching children in remote areas, especially with the staggering number of uneducated children in our countries. For example, I know Nigeria, as at the last time we checked, UNESCO says that we have about 20 million children out of school, right? One of the things that we will need to do with education is try to use our voices to also spread education to those remote parts, right? In their languages, right? In Hausa, in Swahili, right? In Zulu, those questions, sorry, most of those languages, let's make sure that we get it to those remote areas, to places where they don't speak those languages. Career viability as well as policy influence. African voice acting becoming a viable career path for young people across the continent with accurate data to prove the humongous value it adds to the GDPs of our various countries and Africa's creative economy. Policy influence, an industry that becomes a pressure group for sound policies for the creative economy, getting various African governments to strengthen our rights and privileges, especially as regards structures and copyrights. The most exciting frontier isn't having our voices heard globally, it is having our perspectives, values, and worldviews transmitted through those voices. What do we see? What is our call to action? We want to build structures, standardized rates that reflect our true value, formal training programs that combine African oral techniques with modern voice acting requirements, legal frameworks that protect our intellectual properties. Embrace unity. The days of seeing each other as competitors must end. Our individual successes depend on our collective advancement. Share knowledge, mentor serious newcomers, uplift each other's wins, preserve authenticity. We must preserve our authenticity. Let us not lose what makes us uniquely African. Our power lies not in mimicking Western delivery, but in bringing our distinctive nuances to the global soundscape. I see a day when African voice actors are no longer novelties, but necessities. When our accents aren't exotic flavors, but essential ingredients in the global media mix. When the question isn't, should we hire an African voice, but which African voice best sells this story? That day is within our reach. Let me end this address with the story of an African voiceover talent that I know on how his voiceover journey began. His grandmother never learned to read or write, but she always told stories that painted worlds in his mind. I remember my grandma also doing that. He continued by saying her voice was musical, textured, and it carried centuries of oral tradition. This was his first example of voice artistry. On her deathbed, though thoroughly, though thoroughly sad, she was about, sorry, on her deathbed, though thoroughly sad, she was about to give up the ghost. She whispered to him, "When I'm gone, my voice will live in you, and through you, others will hear me." All I was just saying was, when I'm gone, my voice will live in you, and through you, others will hear me. That is the power we all hold. When we speak, we channel our voices of our ancestors, and when others hear us, they hear the collective melody and symphony of the African voice experience. For too long, the world told stories about Africa without African voices. Today, we don't just speak for ourselves, we speak for our generations past and generations to come. The African voice, your voice, isn't just evolving, it's rising, it's resonating, and most importantly, it's finally being heard and will eventually take over. Thank you and welcome to Africa Voiceover Day 2025. Remember, your voice is rising, it's resonating, and most importantly, it's finally being heard. And guess what? You are going to take over. All right. Thank you very much.